Hi, my name's Margaret Bullitt. I am the host of Wellness Adventures, where we explore all things regenerative. We explore what it means to regenerate as a human being, live out the fullness of the life that we've been given, or what it means to regenerate the land that we are stewarding. The people I invite are people who are interested in both of those things, regenerating themselves, regenerating the earth. The animals and the plants are mirrors of us. And together in this conversation, I hope that you will find that you see yourself, that you feel a sense of hope and inspiration for the possibility of positive change. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
So this is Wellness Adventures, Episode 1.
Episode 1, the beginning.
Yes, the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Michael Wolfert, you are the owner of Symbiosis. Mm-hmm. We're in Central Texas. You are helping people like me to regenerate their land, whether it's a small piece of land in the suburbs or a larger piece of land. Perhaps you could share more about what you do professionally.
Yeah, well, I'll give 3 minor adjustments to your statement there. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, you said
You're
people
welcome.
like me, and I would say very few people are just like you. Oh. So every person is unique, and I'm only one of the owners of Symbiosis. We're a worker-owned company, so I actually have been inviting people in to own the company with me, and because I didn't want to be alone in that, I wanted to create a team of people who are really invested in building something together. So that's something unique about us. And then what was the third question that you ended on?
Did I ask a question?
Okay, maybe not. You just asked me to expand on
Yes.
homesteading in Central Texas.
Or the description of what you do.
I remember the third thing. It was, we do help people in the suburbs, but really like what we've specialized in more and more is larger projects outside of the city. And while I still think that like urban agriculture and, people growing their own food and even like the food not lawns movement, I love all that stuff. And that's definitely where I got started with all of this. We saw that there was really a niche to fill in companies that can come and they can help people develop grander visions. And so that's really what we've been focusing on and continuing to refine our ability to do.
Wonderful. How did you get started?
So how far do you want me to go back? I can go back to the beginning of...
Well, when you were a child, did you envision that you would grow up and plant gardens? And
I did not. I envisioned growing up to be a superhero.
Aha.
Or actually, I thought I would join the military for a period of time. I thought I would go and be some sort of make a difference in the world that way. And I was really not good at public school. I was not that kind of learner. I had a lot of challenges learning to read and write, and essentially just barely passed high school. And I think the only reason they graduated me was for their own rankings, because the more people fail, the worse the school looks, right? And so I think they were like, let's just get this kid out of here. But I started a work-study program my senior year, so I got to do less school and I got to work for half of the day, which I was already doing anyway. So I got a chance to enter into the working world right out of high school, and I was a salesperson. I sold semiconductors, right? But here I fell into this role, and I was able to enter the corporate workforce immediately, and I hated it. I was making a great, at the time as a 19-year-old, making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, depending on my sales, was amazing. Wow. Was spending it all, was completely unhappy, was just drinking and just self-medicating because I hated being in the office for 8 hours a day on the phone doing this sales job that I felt like there was no purpose to it. So I spent a lot of time on the internet not doing my job while I was at work and learning about everything that was wrong with the world, and essentially getting into this very negative vibration thought space of just like, oh, we're all gonna die, this is terrible, that's terrible, let's complain, let's be upset about all this stuff. And I had no outlet for solutions. I was trying to work up the courage to quit, and I got laid off, which was great. I was probably the happiest person to get laid off ever, because I wanted to quit, and I got severance and I got unemployment, and it gave me this break of time to sit and think and feel and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And through that process, I started a couple of different things that shifted my perspective. I started doing yoga. I started doing martial arts again. And I ended up sort of divorcing all my current friends because I realized that they were holding me in a place of who I was. And I was trying to become someone new. So I took a break from being friends with them. I ended up moving I was in South Florida at the time, to Central Texas. And long story short, a friend said, "Hey, do you want to go to this permaculture design course?" Sort of out of the blue. And he said, "There's a scholarship, we can go, and we just do a work trade." And I said, "What the heck is permaculture? I've never heard of this before." And so he explained it. He was like, "Oh yeah, it's like gardens and stuff, and it's like sustainability and these kinds of things." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I think I'm interested in that. That sounds good." I was already volunteering on a farm. So I thought, okay, well, that's kind of coinciding with some directions that I'm moving. And I said, "Let me think about it." And I hung up the phone. And it was literally like a minute I thought about it as I was driving to a martial arts class. And I called him right back and I said, "I'm in, let's go." So a week later, we're at this 2-week intensive at the Kerrville, actually not far from here. We're in Fredericksburg right now. So Kerrville, about 15 miles from here, is where I took my permaculture design course. And the biggest takeaway there was I went from feeling like humans are a virus on the planet, and that perspective of we need to reduce our footprint and our impact as much as possible, to this concept that we're a part of a grander, more complex system, and that if we can go around and figure out how to help that system succeed and thrive, which it already wants to do, then we can actually be one of the most positive forces on the planet, because we have this ability to self-reflect and to analyze systems and to move minerals and water and all these things around. And it's like, wow, we could really be a force for good. And I got so excited by that I just said, okay, this is what I want to do. And I said, okay, cool, I'm going to go get a permaculture job. Here we go, And there was nothing available. There were no permaculture companies in Austin at the time. There was no one I could just go get a permaculture job for that I was able to find in my network and on the internet. So I started working. I was already working on this farm. So I moved into a school bus. I became their main farm hand, and I, was trying to build community out there. But I must say, I was so blessed. I was so lucky, because the farm that I was working on, it turns out, was on a 1,000-acre ranch. So they were just borrowing this land and just sort of doing this trade, and they were farming a very small part of it, not the whole 1,000 acres. But the gentleman who owned the ranch, his name was Sid Dubose, had hosted the inventor, or the one of the inventors of permaculture, Bill Mollison, who sort of popularized it and spread it through the world, had hosted him there way, way, way in the beginning. And so here I am.
Hosted him as just a overnight guest?
To teach PDCs there, permaculture design courses. And so here I was at one of the origin points of permaculture in Texas, didn't even know it yet. Before I even knew the word permaculture, I was already volunteering on this farm that was connected to that. And so as soon as I started learning about this stuff, I got to connect with Sid more, and I got to work on the greater ranch for a period of time. And so the journey continues of me just trying to get any jobs related to permaculture. So I did that with Sid for a little while, but it was a little funny because, for various reasons, but essentially I was just too isolated. I'm this young man. I'm working with someone who's in their 70s, and the farmers as well were much older than me. And so I didn't have a lot of community out there.
Did your friend who suggested you take the permaculture class, was he working with you?
No. So another wrinkle to this story, and I'm sorry to give you such a long answer to your question.
No,
but
it's good. It's all good.
We were all living in this house together. There were like 6 adults living in a 2-bedroom house, and we bought this school bus that could run on vegetable oil. Wow. And we ended up having all these community events. We invited the person's son who we were renting the house from over to one of our community events, and he told his mom, "Hey, they've got like 6 people living in your house right now." And she was not okay with that. So she kicked us out, basically. So we had to do this sudden move out, and everyone abandoned a bunch of their stuff and this bus. They basically just did a really messy move out. So I took the bus, me and my wife, Scarlett, took the bus, and we brought it out to Blanco. So my wife and I moved into the school bus, and we moved to the 1,000-acre ranch. And so that was when I was like, okay, now I'm really out here. But all of my other friends sort of disbanded and went off and did other things. You know, it was this sort of messy exit from this just moment where we were all living in this home together. So I go through this phase of working at the 1,000 Acre Ranch. I leave there because I'm too isolated. And my next very blessed transition was I go to work at this canopy tour business where we're taking people zip lining through beautiful cypress trees. It's called Cypress Valley Canopy Tours. They're in Spicewood, Texas. They're still around. Very inspiring place. And they hired me as a farmer, but their profitable business was the canopy tours. And so I'm getting to farm. I'm
So
out here
people
in the
zip
field.
line up in the canopy?
Yes.
And then
they built
they're
these
zip lining
platforms.
over. What are they over? What are they looking at?
So there's a spring-fed creek that leads down into the Pedernales River that we're zip lining through. So this is beautiful. It's like an ecosystem. Or did I say it wrong?
Well, you said it the way
Pedernales?
it's written, Pedernales, but here in Fredericksburg they call it the Pedernales.
Pedernales. Okay, got it. That's funny. Okay, so anyway, you're taking people through these beautiful, pristine ecosystems, and it's very repetitive, right? So, and I really wanted to be doing the farming, and so there was this tension between, well, I want to be farming, but they keep pulling me off to do these canopy tours while I'm in the middle of some farm task that needs to get done today, you know. And so anyway, that didn't work out long term. Ended up working at a nursery this was actually one of my favorite things. And he said, you know, I've got this 1/4 acre and I've got all these plants. Let's just experiment. Let's just play. So I got to experiment with food forestry there and watch it over the course of a couple years. And I got to experiment with all these different plants. And that's really where I got my plant knowledge, was working with Mitch and just looking at plants every day and looking at ways to mix and match them and create these like layered systems. You know, the food forest, I think, is one of the most well-known permaculture ideas out there. And so
Jim Gale.
Yeah, Jim Gale, Food Forest Abundance, those guys have definitely surfed that wave. And so that was my third thing. So it was the farming, and then farming and canopy tours, where I'm giving ecological tours and talking to people about the plants and the native ecology, and then working at Hill Country Natives, the nursery, doing food forestry research and plant genetic developments for Central Texas. So I had this incredibly blessed journey of all these different mentorships. And this is when I start to talk about, I want to help people do food forests and earthworks, and I want to help people grow their own food in a way that reconnects them to nature, and I want to do this professionally, and I want to start a company. And so I start just putting this out there, telling my friends about it, and I'm sort of disorganized and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. I've never started a company before, but I'm just putting it out there like, this is what I want. And pretty soon after I started talking about that openly, my friend Caroline Riley Carberry, she had a company called One World Permaculture, and she's mostly focused on education. She's an incredible educator, community builder. She still teaches permaculture design courses.
Is she here in Texas?
She is. She's in Austin. She works with the Austin Permaculture Guild for that. Her and her husband, Michael Carberry, started a school called the Whole Life Learning Center, and there's a food forest there that her and I have worked on that's beautiful. Anyone can go see it. It's great. So Caroline says, hey, I've got these clients that I don't have time to work with, and I'm just wondering, would you like to work with these clients? And I think it was sort of a just sink or swim situation, right? Because she wasn't there holding my hand and telling me, here's how you do this. It was just like, okay, here's a contact, go meet with them and figure it out, right? And luckily I had all these different mentors along the way that helped me learn how to do things. But this is where the sales training comes in, right? Because I had a career in sales before that. So not that I'm like a real salesy guy. And in fact, I never wanted to do sales. And I sort of hated the sales environment.
But you learned how to close.
I learned how to listen to people's goals and what they need, and how to go out into the world and find it and bring it back to them and say, I think this is what you're asking for. So here's a plan. Here's all the materials. Here's what it's going to take me time-wise to do it. So here's kind of an organized thing that you can say yes to, a plan. And then I had to actually learn how to implement it, right? Because I wasn't handy. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, right? So initially I had my stepdad, who grew up building houses with his father, helping me learn how to actually, do stuff. I mean, I had learned from farming and from working in the nursery, how to work with plants, but I didn't know how to build garden beds or how to drive trucks or how to haul trailers or how to operate heavy equipment or any of this stuff. So it was a total fly by the seat of your pants, learn as you go situation. And at the time, I only had a Honda Fit.
Oh.
And people said it was like a clown car because you could fold those back seats down, and I'd have wheelbarrows and fruit trees and soil and plants, and I'm just pulling.
And is that
thing
about
after
as big as a
thing.
Mini Cooper?
It's very
Tiny.
small, but there's something magical about the Honda Fit. You can really fit just about anything in there if you put your mind to it. So yeah, that's how I got started. I mean, long story long. That's I could continue to go on because it's just such a funny set of circumstances that had to take place for me to even have that opportunity. Yeah. And then I had to work very, very hard to make it happen. And there was very little financial gain, in the early days. And it was just this sort of very underdog situation. And now we're here. We've been in business for 10 years and we've got 20 employees and we're doing great. And it seems like we're sort of leading the charge here in Central Texas for helping people design homesteads and permaculture systems and helping people to figure out regenerative agriculture. There's certainly a lot of other great organizations, but there's not a lot of companies that you can go to and essentially get help from start to finish of creating the plan, implementing the plan, and then even helping to maintain things until they're established, which I think of as like 3 legs of a stool.
Yes. May I reflect back to you what I heard?
Please do.
I am struck that you are somebody who brings something positive out of otherwise negative experiences, like being laid off or working a job that you detest or having your household all be evicted. Somehow you kept landing on your feet and you kept finding something good. And so that tells me something important about you, that you don't, well, just that you kind of do what you are doing with the soil. It's like you can have compost, like you can have shit come into the soil, but you see, oh, this is good, and you've done that with your life.
Yeah, I certainly try. I had a single mom, and she just, I think the idea of no matter what happens, there's an opportunity and there's a way to survive if you just like come to terms with whatever situation you're in and like make a plan and just start working, just start taking action. That was deeply ingrained in me. And so I got to thank my mom for, sort of that resilience and just like you can put your mind to something and make a plan and you can execute it. You might have to change the plan along the way, but the sooner you just get headed in a direction, the better.
And take action.
Yeah.
So your mother, that interests me. She obviously had a big impact on you. And you once told me that your father, you haven't had a relationship with him since you were 4.
Yeah, that's right. So we left when I was 4. We left him, and so I got to really watch my mom, earn and take care of us in that respect. So she was moving around, seeking jobs, and actually, now that I realize it, she was in sales a lot of the time. She was in carpet sales a lot of the time. And I also have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. And so I sort of grew up in this environment of like, women can do anything. And my mom was always sort of like, man, like the men in the company are kind of rude, or like, they put you down as a woman, as of course, a long time ago. I mean, I'm much, what do I want to say? Things have progressed quite a bit. So back then, I think it was a lot more common for men in the workplace to be very disparaging of a woman who's trying to do the same job as them, right? And so I remember growing up like, yeah, man, these guys are being mean to my mom at work. Like, that's not cool. And just sort of this, I want to say like a feminist upbringing in a way, and just watching, these strong women in my life raise me and not having as much of a masculine influence. So I think that was sort of an interesting aspect of my childhood. And I think trying to bring some of that feminine outlook into the business that I'm building has benefited me. Really trying to care for everyone within the business and making sure that we're not optimizing for like one specific outcome. I think that's a mistake that a lot of, not just businesses, but even people that I work with, if they have that outlook of like, we're going to optimize for tomatoes, and then like you get this tunnel vision on one thing, or we're going to optimize for profit. And thinking of the system more holistically, and how there's all these different connections, and how if you optimize for just one thing, you're going to block out so many opportunities and so many important things, and essentially just neglect 99% of the system. One thing, I think it can be a little bit of a harder road. Thank you. It can be a little bit of a harder road, taking that more holistic approach, because it's just less complicated to just focus on one thing and say, you know what, I'm just going to grow a bunch of tomatoes. That in some ways can be easy, right? Especially if you don't put any limits.
It's like a monoculture.
Yeah. Which eventually breaks down, but especially if you don't put any scruples or limits on it, it's like, oh, I'll use all the synthetic fertilizer I want. I'll use all the herbicide to kill everything else. I'm going to till, and I'm going to do all these different things, and just focus on this one outcome. You can definitely achieve that outcome for a period of time,
right.
But how long do you want to do that for, and how does that really? What's the actual long-term outcome of that?
So you wanted to grow up to be a superhero, which sounds to me kind of masculine. But you had a holistic view of wanting everything to work out, not just one thing.
Yeah, I think I always had this desire to save something. I think initially that was, I wanted to save my mom and my sister from my dad, because he was an abusive alcoholic and I couldn't. I was only 4 years old, right? And then I remember when we left, people telling me, well, now you're the man of the family.
And you were like, 4 years old?
Oh my God. Like, what am I supposed to do with that, right?
Yeah.
So then I also have to try to be the man of the family at a very young age, and not really know how to do that. And also, when you leave someone that you're just a child, you still love your father, you want your father, you want to play with your father, and you don't understand why they're not able to live up to their role within the family. And then I think another layer is, because that person is sort of excommunicated and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, or they're not a healthy figure in your life, it's like not as acceptable to be sad about missing them.
Right.
So I think all of that sort of led to a little bit of a hero complex, I would say. And so, obviously sales wasn't scratching that itch, oh, I'm just here to make money. Like, what am I doing? This isn't scratching my hero complex, right? And so then when I found permaculture, it was like, oh, cool, here's a way to be a hero, right? And so then I actually had to look out for that. And I got some help from Javin Bernakovich at one point. He pointed this out to me, and I'm very grateful to him, that it was like, you're self-sacrificing so much to build this business, and in such a way that's actually detrimental to yourself, to your family, to the business. And, it can become this like self-sacrifice or even like suffering competition at some point.
Right. He was one of your mentors?
Yeah. So he took me through a holistic life design. So back to that word holistic, the whole system, where you sort of zoom out, you look at your life, you sort of organize it in a way that is actually based in a spreadsheet, which I know most people would say, oh my God, you can't put your life into a spreadsheet, but it's sort of an exercise to just look at everything. And it was a great program. And I think it really opened my eyes to this concept of like, we are part of all the systems that we're working on. So we think holistically about the system, but then what about humanity as a part of that system, and as a very, very large part of that system? It goes back to this philosophy of, well, a lot of people think we need to remove ourselves as much as possible and reduce our footprint, especially during the sustainability movement. It was about reducing your footprint.
So we had some technical issues, and we're back.
Yeah. First podcast. We got to work out all the kinks. You've got this beautiful live edge table here, and technology was not necessarily built with this natural edge in mind.
No, it likes square edge tables.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were talking about humans as a part of the system.
Yes.
And I really feel like that's where so many things diverge, this trying to divorce ourselves from nature and trying to control nature in certain ways that really come around to be very negative in the end if you play it out long enough.
Yes.
You get these short-term results by optimizing for a few different outcomes, but then in the long term, it just can't work, you know?
Right.
Because nature is this complex system and we're a part of it. I really like to think that the natural systems on planet Earth, we're so interconnected with them that they're actually our life support systems. There's no way that we could inhabit this planet without all these different complex relationships that take place. And then because of that, we're so deeply intertwined with nature. I think we're only just now figuring out what happens when we move away from that. We're starting to see a few generations of moving more and more away from having any sort of nature connection on a daily basis, and we're starting to see, or
even the
happens.
idea that we aren't part of nature. This
Right.
idea that we are to control nature, and we forget that we are a part of the equation, and
Right.
and we were designed that way.
Or this idea that we can go in and harm an ecosystem without having some harm come back on us, right?
Right.
I don't think that was something that people would have come to the conclusion of, oh yeah, we can just go in here and just destroy this whole system and be completely absolved of any responsibility for that. And look at this GDP, you know, look at these numbers and computers that we've produced.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the holistic, you know, these buzzwords, they grow and they fall. And I think sometimes we get tired of them, like holistic or sustainability or this or that, like you know, especially when it starts getting greenwashed and starts getting connected to these big corporations and they start using them. And then it's like, it becomes not cool anymore. And so I think holistic has been around for a long time. But you and I were talking the other day, and it seems like wellness is a term that more and more people are interested in. And I think it's very inviting. What does wellness mean to you? What does wellness mean to this person? What, you know, even just defining what wellness is, I think is a wonderful exercise. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Oh, I'm going to turn the tables. Well, my first thought is that wellness is already a word that's being co-opted because big hospitals have wellness centers. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's where I'm going to go to feel well. To me, wellness is holistic, you know, because if one part of my life is out of whack, I don't feel well. I think it has a lot to do with peace. So to me, you know, body, mind, spirit is all part of wellness. What I eat, to the extent that I have any control over it, what I breathe, the water I drink. We were talking earlier about the pictures I have on my walls. What do I take in visually? We were talking about this mural behind me that I had painted. I asked my friend, who's the artist, to paint it 24 years ago. And I said, I'd like to have as if a window looking onto a landscape in Tuscany. And so she painted it on a piece of plywood, and it was screwed to the wall of my bathroom, my guest bathroom in my house in Seattle, and built the arch with the windowsill, and it was just over the bathtub. And it would be what people would see when they'd go in if they came to dinner, or what I would see when I went to use the bathroom. And you and I were talking about how something like this image really kind of works on a subliminal or subconscious level, because now I'm living in the hill country of Texas with vineyards and with hills in the background. I mean, this looks a lot more like where I live now than where I lived in Seattle.
Yeah.
So but that idea of wellness being, what do I ingest? What do I let it into my eyes? What are the podcasts that I listen to? What are the videos that I watch? How do they make me feel? The conversations I have with people, how do I feel with this person? So there have been people I've let go of, and activities I've let go of, and memberships or subscriptions I've let go of, because I'm just monitoring and noticing how do I feel when I am with this person or when I interact with this information.
Yeah.
And so my goal here in Texas is to create a place that is holistic and that does draw out wellness. And it's called the Filling Station. And it will be, I hope, a place where animals and plants and the earth can thrive and be regenerated, and that the humans who are working it can be regenerated, and the people who come and visit can be regenerated.
Yeah. I love that vision, and I'm happy to be helping you with that.
Thank you. Well, you're such a key part of it. I love having a collaboration, because I used to believe that I was supposed to be, in my own way, a superhero. I thought I was supposed to be a remarkable individual, and other people were more of a hindrance to me. I just felt like they were either trying to lower my standards by praising me, or I felt defeated because they were criticizing me. So I didn't know how to work with other people. Yeah. And I was afraid of being exposed for not knowing something. And here I am doing something I absolutely cannot do alone. And it's so obvious that I need so much help. And so it's been very humbling, but it's also been very liberating, because I realize, wow, I've been given a vision, and for me to hold that vision is what I have to offer, and to not compromise on that vision, but to find the helpers that I need to do the work on the land, or do the work on the buildings, or make the food, or plant the garden, or do the massages, or the whatever. There's so many things that other people have to offer, and I used to feel inadequate because I didn't have those things, as though I was supposed to be everything.
Sure. Yeah, I think that that cooperation over competition is really one of the superpowers and one of the edges that people who want to create the more beautiful world that we're all sort of yearning for as this current system goes through its death throes, and we're wondering, well, what's next, and how do we help doula this new world into existence, right? Without just fighting tooth and nail against the old world, or the systems that aren't working anymore. So I think that's interesting that you brought up your own change of perspective from like, everyone around me is a competitor, or someone that I need to like make sure that they're not looking better than me, or any positive outcome that they create is like means, oh, therefore I didn't create that outcome, so therefore. And bringing it back to nature and natural systems, it's very clear that a lot of things are cooperating. And one of the things that I get a lot from clients that I laugh internally about, because it's happened so many times, is people will talk about competitive relationships between plants. And really the science has, I think, proven unequivocally that plants cooperate more than they compete. Sure. For the most part, they're going to grow a little slower in certain situations, but they don't mind. They're not here to optimize. They're not here to grow as fast as possible and produce the biggest fruit. They just want to be healthy and in a community of other beings that are helping each other get along. It's that saying, like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So when people anthropomorphize competition onto plants, and I think someone did this with you, right? There was a truck driver who said, oh, you planted those trees too close together. I love it when these people just parachute in and criticize our well thought out plan. But anyway, right across the street is this forest, or any examples, not even across the street, within a stone's throw away at any given moment, where there's 3 trees growing right next to each other, and they're doing this beautiful dance of growing around
or
each
literally
other.
the 3 trees that are entwined.
Yeah.
The hackberry, the sycamore, and the mesquite, and they are literally entwined like dancers in a close embrace.
Yeah.
And they are full height. I mean, they're in beautiful shape, apparently.
Right.
And yet they're entwined.
So the difference between the conventional mindset of what I would call the old world or the dying world is those trees are too close. None of them are going to be able to get to their full height. Therefore, we have to sacrifice 2 of them for one to survive. And the regenerative is like, look at this beautiful relationship. Look at this dance that these trees are in. And let's study how they're helping each other. And let's look at how that's affecting and creating this incredibly unique situation. And I also have thought, if plants have any sort of emotional spectrum that we could relate to, could you imagine these 3 trees, all they've ever known is being in this union together? You come and you cut down 2 of them for the good of one in the middle. And, this being that's left now standing alone, sure, maybe it can grow a little bigger, maybe it can grow a little faster. But if it has any emotional spectrum whatsoever, how does that plant feel about that choice that we made, And there's some really interesting books like The Secret Life of Plants and a number of other ones. Have you
I own it. I own many books that I haven't read, but I hope by proximity to my
put them under your pillow, get the osmosis. That was the kind of homework studier I was, but because I'm a plant nerd, I do know that they've put like EKGs on plants and these different sensors, and then they'll come over with the intention to prune a leaf off of a plant or to harm the plant in some way. And the plant's readings spike. It knows as soon as the intention, and it's more perceptive than we are, in that, like, if you're pretending and you don't really plan to take the leaf off, but you're acting like you're going to, the plant doesn't react to it. So it's like funny. It knows whether we're pretending or not, right? So I really think it's about time scales more than anything else. If you put a time-lapse camera on a plant, you see it moving and dancing, and they can't up and move their location. Their main reaction is to actually change their form and to put out a bunch of seeds, and then whichever ones of those survive, they now have new options, new characteristics. So in a moment, I'll go into like the difference between GMO and selective breeding, which I think is something a lot of people get confused about, and it's one of my soapboxes, one of the hills I'm willing to die on. But timescales, our lifespan is so short compared to an ecosystem. And I think this is one of the things we were talking about, birth and death and what it means to bring humans or anything into the world in a good way and to live a good life and to die well. One of the fascinating things about ecosystems and regeneration in general is that these complex relational systems essentially can live and change and grow and get quote unquote better, whatever that means to you, over time. They don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end like a single being does, right? So I think that's one of the things that we love about ecosystems and landscapes is it's like, this thing has been here long before me and it will outlast me. But we get into trouble when we try to interact with them on our terms and on our timescales, and we forget that we're just visiting this ecosystem that has this lifespan that is potentially indefinite. And we're only going to make a small impact. We're just here to play a small role in this greater dance. But we want to see results in our lifespan, and that's always going to be the case, right? We want to see as much positive impact as possible. But I think sometimes in the rush to do that, we make rash decisions and we kind of don't really sit and think and feel and listen. And then we do things that we can't undo. So that's one thing I've enjoyed about working with you is that, you're not afraid to say, well, I got this vision last night. I've got this intuition now. The land told me this. And sometimes as like the one who's trying to put structure and planning and mobilize and get things done, sometimes I'm like, oh shoot, I was in the middle of planning that. Now I have to change that. But I have to honor and respect it, right? I'm like, okay, great. She's taking the time to do that really important work. And I'm just here to help. So I'm going to follow that lead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking about the pond and the very detailed estimate for bringing heavy equipment in and digging a pond and lining it. And I had heard from Chris, who works for you, that glaying or having pigs dig and line a pond was a thing. I'd never heard of that, but something in me was excited by that. It just responded. And so I started thinking more about the pigs. I didn't research it, but I just was thinking about it. And then the next day or two, when I thought about, okay, I need to respond to that estimate. Do I give the go ahead for the heavy equipment to come in? I started crying. And I thought, wow, why am I crying? And I really felt that the land was saying, we're so tired of all the heavy equipment and we want the pigs. So I've never had pigs, and we're going to have pigs. And I'm just trusting that they will do what they do, dig and line this pond. And I'm trusting that if that's what the land wants, then that's going to be the better choice.
Yeah. And, if I was just driven by just results and, just these like very tangible metrics, I would be like, well, the heavy equipment is the way to get it done, right?
Yeah.
But because we're here on this journey of experimentation and learning, it's like we can try to glay the pond with the pigs. And just for anyone who's not familiar with this concept, pigs in a landscape, they need to wallow in mud. And so they'll dig these little miniature ponds with their noses. It's amazing that pigs can dig in hard ground with their noses. And then they'll roll around in these little depressions they've created. And then those depressions can hold water so that even when it's not raining very often, the pigs have mud because they need that mud because pigs get sunburned. And so these little guys and, the wild pigs that are all over Texas that are kind of a challenge ecologically, they follow the rivers and they stay close to water because they'll get sunburned and they'll overheat if they're not close enough to water. So the concept is we can use this natural behavior of the pigs to seal ground and make it less permeable to water to seal an entire pond. And it's a great experiment. We don't know if it's going to work or not, but we're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, you can always bring in the bulldozer later and, do it the what I want to call the old fashioned way, but really the new fashioned way, or the more construction based way. Right. So I just love that you're open to that kind of stuff because there's so many concepts like this where if someone wants a guaranteed result, I'm not going to recommend that they try the pigs, and most people just don't want to mess with all that because there's so many variables, I
think your pond guy, Pete, the heavy equipment operator, he mentioned a situation that he was aware of. He hadn't done it himself, but somebody had dug vertical walls. I mean, like 90-degree angled walls of a pond or of a pool, and lined it, and somehow it was not doing what they had hoped. I mean, it wasn't holding the water, or it would just, as I recall, it was kind of just an empty, unnatural looking hole. And I don't remember where I was going to go with that, but somehow the mind thought it was a good idea, and it wasn't.
Yeah, there's so much detail and nuance to these things, and we have so much power with the heavy equipment and the fossil fuels we have available to us. And sometimes it feels like a race to me because there's the standard developers are out there, the people who are currently practicing extractive agriculture and all these different massive industries. They're out there churning, they're out there doing their things, and they're consuming resources, they're consuming land at an incredible rate. I mean, you look at the farmland losses that we're having because that's the easiest land to develop. It's flat.
Yes.
It doesn't have flooding in most cases. And so that's where the developers go, and they buy it up from farmers who can't make money because they're indebted to the chemical companies and to the machinery companies. And their kids don't want to take on that business. They look at what their parents are going through and they say, gosh, that looks terrible. And they're having to deal with poisons and getting sick and all this stuff, right? And it's a commodity. So they have no control over what they sell. So first of all, you don't have control over how well the crop produces. You can do everything in your power and get bad weather and not produce a good crop, even with all of our industrial inputs and controls. And then once they produce a crop, they have no control over what the market will buy it for. And it's a perishable item. So they have to sell it that year. They can't hold on to it until the price goes up. And so these farmers are in a really tough spot. And then the developers come in and they buy up the farmland, and then they put in the tract homes. And so to me, the regenerative agriculture or the permaculture movement is in a race to grow and educate and subsume all of these different industries, the development industry, the landscaping industry, construction, agriculture, all of these things. We can do it in right relationship with the land. We can do it in right relationship with nature, and we can change our course from one of disconnection and disease, essentially, is where we end up. Diseases of all different kinds, mental, emotional, physical, all the different levels. We're seeing it, right? If you look at the statistics, it's just wild what's happening right now. Or we can change course, and we can stay connected with nature. We can remember how to listen, and then we can go on a path of staying connected and wellness, essentially. And so I think there's so much room for growth. And this is one of the reasons why competition doesn't make any sense in this space, because we're only taking the tiniest market share from all these different industries. Even though, I've built this company and I'm very happy with where it's at. And I feel like we've made it. We've broken through the hard time where most businesses fail, but we're just so small compared to all these things. And there's so many industries to take market share from, and the people are hungry for it. And it's like, you can't train folks, and people can't start enough businesses doing this to take that market share away fast enough, in my mind. So it feels a little bit like a race. However, I try not to be in that space of urgency, because I don't think you actually get anything done faster or more effectively or in a lasting way when you're in a space of panic and urgency, right? So
that goes back to that conversation we were having earlier about fear and excitement, and because fear is quite debilitating and constricting. Here on this little piece of land, relatively, but large compared with anything else I've ever done, my vision is to do the best that I can and be a model for others, hopefully to be inspired by, no matter what happens around me. Because all the fields, the vineyards around me, they could all become tract home developments, and I suspect they probably will. And yet I think about Central Park in New York, where I lived for a few years. I didn't live in the park, but I lived near it. And I always loved going into that place. Here it was surrounded by very tall buildings, and yet it felt like you were in nature. And so I know how important it is to have a sanctuary for the human spirit. And then when you add animals and all the birds and the bees and the wildlife and we have no idea how complex this could be. And it's such a beautiful thing. And then raising food and becoming more self-sufficient, so I'm not dependent on the supply lines and the big box stores and so on. I just think that that's an economy that I want to be a part of, and I can't control what the big systems are doing around me, but I do have this piece of land. Then I think about Will Harris, and he said that the young people who are so idealistic about permaculture and they just want to change the world, and then they're disappointed. Their idealism is really thwarted. But he said he doesn't try to change the world. He just tries to change the land that he has control over.
Yeah, I certainly had to pass through that disappointment as well, because when you first find out about it and you're so focused on the negative and you're like, oh my God, there's a solution. Let's all adopt this right away, right? And you want to see everything change overnight so we can avoid some sort of a collapse, right?
Yes.
What I hope is happening, and it's interesting how our culture, and maybe all cultures, have sort of an obsession with apocalypse or endings and beginnings. what I hope is happening is that we're going through the death throes of one thing, even as we're going through the birthing contractions of a new thing, and that they're sort of happening simultaneously, and that as one system fades, this new system is gaining its momentum and its capacity to pick up these threads and to carry things forward in the right way.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to help create. And I think that's one place where I see some bifurcation in the community. Some people want to sort of stock up on food supplies, and they want to have a bunker, and they want to have guns and gates. And, when I first got on this journey, I was sort of like, yes, I want to be ready. I want my family to survive whatever is to come. And I thought about it a lot. It was like my little obsession was like, okay, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Okay, well, I need to have this big of a garden. Okay, I need to have pigs. I need to have this. I need to be ready, right? And then we went through COVID, and it was actually like, oh, this might be it. And first of all, what happened was I actually felt weirdly relieved. I actually remember, like, in the very beginning, we were having a very misty weather when it first started getting announced, and the roads were empty, right? It was like the world was just quiet, and everyone was waiting to see what was going to happen. And I was out here still doing this permaculture work for clients, so I was like, I had the world to myself in a way, and I felt like, oh, I don't have to worry about what the disaster is going to be anymore, because here it is. So now I can start reacting to it, because the hardest thing is to plan for 10 potential or 20 or 30 different possible disasters. Is it going to be a flood? Is it going to be a fire? Is it going to be a meteor? Is it going to be
an earthquake?
And you can just on and on and on, right? And it was like, oh, well, I never thought it might be a pandemic, or it might be a virus or something like that. So now what do I do? But what I really came to through that process was, okay, no matter how much food I have, no matter how safe and protected me and my whole family are, I have neighbors. And even if you're on 1,000 acres, you have neighbors. And they're going to run out of food at some point, and they're going to start looking for food. And am I going to kill every single person that shows up at my place? And like, at what point does surviving become not worth it? At what point am I just, where's the gratification of surviving in that way? And so that's when I was like, okay, it's not about surviving. It's about transitioning from one thing to the next. And it's about doing that with all the people around me, even if I don't believe the same stuff as them, even if I don't particularly like them, it's like, okay, we're going to find a way to, as gracefully as possible, just keep moving forward.
That is such a beautiful vision, and it really reflects, in my mind, what regenerative agriculture and permaculture are about. I'm thinking about the mycelium network underground of the mushrooms and the trees, and how they're all interconnected and they're all communicating with each other. And I think about Bruce Lipton and the biology of belief and the cellular network, and that if one organ is not doing well, it affects all the rest of the body, and even down to a cellular level, that if something is healthy, it helps everything. And so my wish here is to do that in the land, but also to just bring the people who are helping me with the land, and to invest in their lives, and that every time I do that, the cellular network is getting healthier, and the intelligence and the communication, the outward communication, like the mycelium network, is getting, that web of life is getting stronger and stronger, so that when the rain comes, the topsoil doesn't just go, carry it off. The structure of the plants that are growing and the nutrients in the soil, it holds the water that comes, the torrential water even that comes. And so when something torrential or dramatic happens in my life or on to this area, I just expect that the people and the land together will have such a strong web that it creates like a basket or a web or like a hammock or something that can hold us. And that I'm not having, because I shared with you a couple months ago that I met somebody who was saying, I think you're not safe. You're very vulnerable. You're all alone on this land. And you're saying, I think you should have security cameras everywhere, and you should have an electronic gate, and and I was just thinking, why am I feeling so scared all of a sudden? I wasn't scared before he was talking to me, and I thought, Michael works with me, and I have other men who are helping me, and they know my situation, and they're not saying, oh, you're vulnerable. And I just thought, I think I'm going to let this person go, out of my life, because this is not what I want to be listening to. I would much rather have this web of interrelated, interconnected relationships. And that's where I feel secure. And then my faith, I'm going to be aligned with God, and my faith, and I'm not going to rely on cameras and technology.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the mycelial network, I think it's becoming so much more common knowledge these days, but I also live in this sort of bubble where like everyone I talk to is sort of hip to these things. So in case anyone listening doesn't know what the mycelial network is when you see a mushroom or any kind of fungus, even the ones that look like mold, that's just the fruit. So that's like the fruit on a tree, and the whole tree is underground, and all it really looks like is this white webbing, or it almost looks like wires running through the material, and that can they can live on, there's different kinds of fungus, and some of the mycologists that I know would do a much better job explaining this, so I'll just keep it basic. But the really interesting thing about that is that they're finding that the mycelial network is like the internet for plants, and they allow the trees to communicate and say like, oh, there's this stress factor over here, and they can even help with transporting different nutrients, different physical resources. And we're really only just starting to understand the microbiome in general of the whole planet, as well as what's inside of us. One of the most astounding things to me that I'm still trying to wrap my head and my heart around is like, we're more microbe than anything else. Our body actually has more microbes in it than human cells.
Yes.
So I understand it, which is still baffling. Like, it's just a hard thing for me to understand.
Yes. I learned that just since COVID, because everybody was so afraid of this virus. And then I discovered, oh, I'm full of viruses. I'm full of bacteria. That's what makes us who we are. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to just have a healthy immune system. And because like Maria, my cat, who I just buried last night, she's full of microbes that are now going to help her body break down. But as long as she was alive and she had an immune system, they were not destroying her. They weren't turning her into mush. They were just there.
Yeah.
And we have that too, and as long as we're alive, we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
There's so many ways that we're designed to be healthy.
Yeah, and we've only identified, I think, like 1% or less of the microbes out there. And the only reason we do identify them is when we see them over and over and over again. And it's like, oh, what's this? Oh, it's lactobacillus. It's what makes yogurt, or these other microbes that are more harmful in certain situations. Then we start to identify like, oh, that's a version of the flu, or that's this or that. But, there's still the vast majority of these characters are completely unidentified. We don't know what they do. We don't know what their role is in this very complex system. And so there's so much discovery that can happen there. And it encompasses, fungus, bacteria, and virus are three different kinds of things that you can't see without a microscope. That's why they're microbiology, right? But they have such a huge effect on the macrobiology, or on, all the things that we can see. And so now we're learning, oh, if you till the soil, if you spray herbicides, if you spray fertilizers, if you do all these conventional agricultural things, it's so detrimental to the microbial community. It's a true unsurvivable, untenable situation when those practices are done over a long enough period of time, and then the soil dies, and then nothing can grow there until the microbiology is fixed. And I think similarly in our bodies, we're finding, oh, if you take antibiotics all the time to treat certain illnesses, or for whatever reason, then you're killing your whole gut microbiome, which actually has a huge impact on your personality, on your mood even. I've even gone so far as to say like, you know, sometimes I go through these cycles where sometimes I feel better than others. And if I'm starting to feel a little depressed, it's like, I'm gonna eat some dang pickles, you know, and some sauerkraut. And believe it or not, you know, if you're taking care of your gut, if you're sleeping well, if you're exercising, and, you know, you're making a little bit of time to play, you're eating well. I may have already implied that with the, you know, pickled fermented foods, but that's like a lot of times that fixes whatever's going on with me if I'm having some sort of a moment of not feeling well.
Yeah. So Michael, you said you wanted to speak about the difference between selective breeding and GMO.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. This is definitely something that I think a lot of people get confused with, and I've even seen people who are, you know, in the scientific community. I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson getting asked about this on a podcast. Said, well, isn't GMO dangerous? And he said, no, we've been doing that for thousands of years.
That's genetically modified organisms.
Correct. Yeah. And I think the confusion there was between selective breeding and GMO. So we have been doing selective breeding for thousands of years. I mean, as long as agriculture has existed, we've been doing selective breeding. And what that is we're taking a plant and, you know, let's say there's 1,000 wheat plants and people look at all of them and they say, oh, this one has the biggest seeds. We're going to save these seeds and we're going to replant these seeds next year. And they just keep going through that process over and over and over again. And something like corn used to be this little tiny grass with very, very small, very low calorie output. And then now through selective breeding, we've brought it up to be the corn plant that you know today. Same thing with bell peppers. So the original bell pepper plant is actually, you can still get it. It's a native Texas plant. It's called chili piquin or chili patine. It has multiple names. So basically it means small chili. And it's a beautiful plant and the birds love it. But every single bell pepper, every single hot pepper, they all came from that one plant.
Wow.
So just through selective breeding. Now you can take selective breeding and you can add GMO to it. So like using corn as an example, now what GMO is they're actually taking genetic material from other organisms. It doesn't even have to be plants. They're taking stuff from animals and in a lab, they're splicing it in to these organisms. And that's where we get the genetically modified from. So this is a very new process and it requires a lot more technology.
Or freaks.
Yeah, and mutations can take place without us altering it. So it's even beyond mutations, right? This is actually completely new territory as far as we know.
Is this a chimera?
Yeah, so these organisms, these GMO organisms can have DNA from animals in them. And so it's just a total experiment in that no one knows how it's going to result in the long term. But they're able, the reason that they do this, there's a couple reasons, of course, but one of the reasons is now you've created a completely new organism that is patentable. You can't patent and
life.
Own the seed of something that was just created through selective breeding. But if you create it yourself and you can say, this is completely unique, we own this, we created it with scientists. And then the real problem with that is, and what you see Monsanto do is some of these organisms, they're wind pollinated.
Right.
And so you've got a GMO cornfield next to a normal, you know, heirloom cornfield, and then the wind blows that genetic material over and you get a hybrid, and then they can go after that farmer about it. And they can say, hey, you've got our IP now.
Yes.
And this guy's like, well, I didn't want your freaking IP, you know, like get your GMO out of here. But then they're taking people's farms away
and IP
and
stands
they're suing
for
them. Intellectual property.
Intellectual property.
So they own that organism, right? But it's out there in the world, and now they're trying to GMO mosquitoes, they're trying to GMO all this different stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they also create organisms that are resistant to their herbicides. So they'll create a GMO corn that can survive Roundup in really high concentrations.
Glyphosate.
And so therefore they can spray glyphosate all over this corn and kill every other broadleaf plant in the vicinity, but not the corn. Right. So now they can use higher levels of poison than they've ever used before because they've got these genetically modified organisms.
And when you eat that
corn,
then you have that glyphosate inside your gut and it kills all the microbiome just the way it kills the macrobiome.
Yes, we're coming to find that it doesn't just kill plants, it also can kill microbes and just it can really wreak havoc on these complex interconnected systems. And then of course there was the lawsuit where Monsanto had to pay out you know, a lot of money to someone who was using glyphosate in their job, and they ended up with cancer, and it was proven in court that, hey, there's a correlation here.
Yes.
And the wild thing to me about it is, like, this stuff is still on the shelf. Like, I can walk into Home Depot and I can buy glyphosate right now, and there's like, I'm sure there's warnings on the bottle. Okay, there's like, says don't drink it, right? But like the cashier, there's no process, right? And I can take that and I can apply it in whatever concentrations I want. I can spray it, is it just wherever I want.
You could dump it down the toilet.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when it comes to disposal, actually, we had a client who, I think the property that they ended up owning, previous owner had left a couple barrels of herbicide there, and it was glyphosate. And she was like, I don't know how to get rid of this. No one will take it. I can't take it to the landfill. I can't get rid of it. Eventually, she found a number I think she had to go through this whole wild goose chase, this whole maze. And eventually she found like a part of the Monsanto company that will come reclaim it.
Wow.
And dispose of it, supposedly. I mean, who knows what the heck they're doing with it, right? Maybe just putting it in a bottle, reselling it. But, so yeah, it's a real issue, and it's selective breeding is not necessarily bad. And even like grafting is the act of taking two different organisms and putting them together. So you take the rootstock, and this was invented in China thousands of years ago. So it's been out there
like
for a long time.
Like apples with apples.
Exactly. Yeah. So you take one apple tree that is hardy against drought and pests and disease, and you make that the rootstock. And then you take an apple tree that produces a kind of fruit that you desire, and you actually merge them together into one being. So you take the scion wood of the desirable fruit and you connect it. You cut them both in like a V and then like an anti-V shape, and you put them together and you tape it up. And to me, this is like mind-boggling. Like, who first tried this?
That's what grafting.
That's grafting. Yeah. So if you've bought a fruit in a grocery store, chances are it was a grafted tree, right? So there's these sort of Frankenstein organisms that we don't even think twice about, right? And actually, grafting is not something that you should be scared about. Grafting is time tested. It's okay. It does have an effect on the lifespan and how big that tree is. So it has an effect on that life form's ability to fully express, right? Because it's like two life forms merged together, and yeah, it can have a pretty beautiful life, but it's not going to grow to be as tall as it would if it was just on its own rootstock. However, it might not survive where we want to grow that desirable fruit. So yeah, grafting is another amazing thing, and I have to wonder, like, who first tried this and thought it would work? Like, I'm gonna take part of this tree and that tree, and I'm gonna stick them together. And
well, isn't it similar to breeding dogs?
Sure. Yeah.
Where you take the desirable hair, curly hair or non-allergenic hair dog, and then you have this very ferocious beast dog, and then you have this hypoallergenic ferocious beast.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Sounds like a fun dog to own. Let me know what breed that is. Yeah, well, and we're optimizing for whatever outcomes we want, right? And we're not necessarily producing organisms that are fit to survive on their own. So this is where disconnection from nature happens. Because if you take, let's say, like a Granny Smith apple tree, and you don't graft it and you try to plant it somewhere in the world, it might not have a very good chance of surviving as like a wild apple would. But the problem is that you don't get the same reproducible results as you do from the grafted tree. Now, every single Granny Smith apple or a specific variety like that, they're all cloned from the initial first tree that ever produced a granny apple tree. So now here we are, however many hundreds or thousands of years later, and we are still cloning the same genetic material from that original tree that we said, oh, we like that apple, we're going to go ahead and stick this on all these rootstocks, right? And so there is sort of like this defying of time and of natural process. Now, where this gets dangerous is with selective breeding and grafting and lack of genetic diversity is genetic diversity is how ecosystems create resilience. And so a tree will put out 1,000 seeds. Let's say it's an apple tree, and they're not true to seeds. So you're not going to get, if it's a Granny Smith apple, you're not going to get 1,000 Granny Smiths. If you just plant the seeds, you're going to get 1,000 different kinds of apple trees. Now, 10 of those trees might be extremely drought resistant. 10 of those trees might produce a different kind of apple that's desirable for some reason. 10 of those trees might be flood resistant. They have these different genetic markers that allow
just
them
like
to
children
have different characteristics. Yeah. And then, you know, it's like nurture versus nature. It's also like the conditions that they grow up in can affect what they express genetically. So if we completely curtail the genetic diversity project that is nature, that is producing new varieties of plants that are also adapting to changing conditions, then we're at risk of creating systems that are just brittle and that are not going to be able to survive any sort of extremes. So we have to sort of keep all that in mind, even as we were like, well, I want to go to the store and get a Fuji apple, you know, because those are my favorite.
And I want it to be the same Fuji apple that I ate last week
Right.
and the week before.
Yeah.
Something that I think you said, or that I think I picked up along the way about regenerative agriculture, is that as the soil regenerates and gets richer, then the dormant seeds from hundreds or thousands of years ago can sometimes come up and be expressed. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know about hundreds or thousands of years ago. That might be too much time. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they've found seeds that have been preserved for very long periods of time in the right conditions, but seeds can sit in the seed bank for a long time. And the thing is that
can the seed bank be the earth itself?
Yes. Yeah. So seeds have like these little sensors in them, and they're waiting for the right conditions to germinate. And some of them have a lot of conditions that they're looking for. Some seeds will not sprout unless they've been through a fire. Some seeds will not sprout unless they've been soaked in water. Like a cypress tree needs to soak in water for a long time because it's a riparian tree. It needs to be close to water. So it's not even going to germinate unless it's been soaked in water for a certain period of time. And you see that with fire ecologies where, you know, certain trees, the seed bank will not express until a wildfire comes through.
Wow.
So yes, when the land is degraded and the soil conditions are bad, certain seeds will be less likely to express. And one of my mentors and colleagues, Lee with Southwest Farms, has said he doesn't even bother seeding native grasses or native wildflowers anymore because the seed is so expensive. Instead, what he does is he just does cover crops and rotational grazing. And through those two actions, he can improve the soil such that the native plants in the seed bank of the land that he's working on, even if it's been overgrazed for a long time, start to express. So then you start to see your wildflowers, your bunch grasses, and he didn't have to buy the seed and bring it in. He just had to improve the conditions.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. If people want to learn more about you and your company, Symbiosis, they can look in the notes below and we'll have the hyperlink.
Great. Thanks.